At the NBA as we head into the NBA playoffs, and we're bringing on our friend Parker Ainsworth to chat with us about it. That, and we'll get into some fun conversations NBA-wise as well. That's what's cooking on today's Sports Stove podcast.
From Belly Up Sports and the Belly Up Podcast Network, you're listening to the Sports Stove podcast with your host, Vince Stover.
Hey, good looking, what you got cooking? How's about cooking something up for me?
Welcome into an all-new edition of the Sports Stove podcast. And today's episode is presented by Shocked Energy. Go to shockedenergy.com and use the code STOVE. You get 10% off your purchase. This is a low-calories, zero-sugar energy drink. Just what you need. Watermelon flavored or green apple. Shocked Energy. Again, shockedenergy.com. And use the code STOVE for 10% off your purchase. Today, we are talking about a topic we don't talk about a whole lot on this program, and that's the NBA. And to help us do that, we're bringing in our friend, the Belly Up basketball head, department head, I guess, and host of his own show, Effin' Sports Podcast, the one and only Parker Ainsworth. Hey, Parker, how you doing?
Doing all right, Vince. You doing okay today?
I'm doing well. Got through the weekend and trying to get excited about the new week, just not hard to do the older I get, but
yeah, Monday morning comes a lot earlier every year. I don't know what to do.
It sure does. It sure does. But of course, I look forward to Monday nights because now we have the NLFA football games we broadcast on Belly Up TV. And Monday night, I'll be joined by Andy Sire and also Jason Cooper for the Monday Night Mayhem. And so that brings a little bit of excitement to my Monday, but nonetheless, here we go, another week. But we've come to the conclusion of another NBA season. And, Parker, I don't remember if it was the last time I had you on or the time before that, but I kind of talked about the idea that I have lost a lot of enjoyment in the NBA. Now, when it comes to the playoffs and the finals, I'm all in. Regular season, I just kind of sit back, let it happen, and then jump in at the playoffs. I used to be a massive Phoenix Suns fan growing up. Kevin Johnson, Charles Barkley, Dan Marley, stuck with them through the Kid and the Nash era, and Dan Antonio, all those kinds of things was great. Went to games in Milwaukee, caught the Suns. Went to game in Phoenix and caught the Suns. Then, I don't know, as an adult, I kind of transitioned. I moved to Indiana for a few years, so I was like, well, I got to cheer for something in Indiana. So I started cheering for the Pacers a little bit. That was in the Paul George, the height of Roy Hibbert days, those kinds of things. And now I live in Lexington, Kentucky, and it's all about college basketball and professional basketball. It's just kind of cheering on the Kentucky kids versus really doing much else. But you still follow the NBA, and and you're not that much younger than me. You are younger than me, but not that much younger than me. What is it about the NBA that still holds you there watching NBA games?
Oh, I've just always been in a weird marvel of like just the pure athleticism around it. Whether I was a kid, so you mentioned like in the 90s watching basketball, like I was born at the time when like Michael Jordan was the thing, right? But I guess like I was probably too young to appreciate it. The first guy I remember being like, oh my God, about was like Vince Carter flying through the air, right? Like, and so we still have guys play through the air. The jump shot's from a little different spot, and I still get caught up in like, oh my God, about athleticism. You mentioned your Kentucky guy. I think the athlete that makes me do that the most these days consistently is Bam Adebayo. I'm always like, how is a guy that big doing those things? And so, I find myself appreciating that. And then as I've gotten older, like I coach basketball, I'm a teacher and coach. And so like, there's part of me that gets into what are you doing here? What are you doing there? And those kind of things. Sometimes college basketball is better for that too, but it's just been a lifelong thing.
Yeah, that's a great point because I'm stepping into a varsity head coaching position this next season. And I've been kind of watching some different things and trying to figure out, hey, guys, if you're going to watch somebody, here's a good person to watch, right? And the NBA has changed and whatnot, but there's still a lot we can take from it. And I've had to pay a little bit more attention because of that, because the guys I'm going to be coaching, these are the guys they're watching. And so it's like, okay, well, here, if you can take something good from this, Kyrie Irving, for instance, I'm not a huge Kyrie guy. But I respect his talent among all else. I mean, he's a phenomenal basketball player when he plays, and when he's out there. And granted, none of the kids on my team can do what Kyrie does, but I look say him and Nash. If you go back and watch how they control the game, how they don't get stuck, they kind of dribble through things and they keep the ball alive and keep things going. Those are kind of the two guys that I focused on for my ball handlers. But that being said, it's hard for me. And I think part of it, though, is another thing you brought up, Kentucky guys. They have not won championships in Kentucky, and they go on to the pros, and they have these great careers, and I'm sitting there going, why didn't Calipari do anything more with them in their time in Kentucky? So I'm just a bitter basketball fan. Ultimately is what it comes down to. I'm bitter about so many things.
For sure. I will say that the Kentucky guys, not to be pessimistic, they spend about 18 months in Kentucky. They're just not a big window, I guess, to win a lot of titles in those 12 to 18 months. But no, it's a fun game. You mentioned like Kyrie to Steve Nash. If you tell a modern high school kid to play like Steve Nash, they're gonna be like, huh? Like you got to have a Kyrie Irving or a Chris Paul or a guy to throw out there that is a little bit more just plays now, because they don't know guys that retired in 2010 or 2012 or whatever.
True. There's this is off the beat a little bit, but the guy that I saw live that I thought was the most impressive basketball player I've ever seen doing things on the floor was Jason Kidd. And that's back when he was in Phoenix. And the athleticism that he had, you don't think of athleticism totally when you think of Jason Kidd, but he was back then, he was so fast. He was making baskets in the weirdest spots, just so aggressive and everything like that. And of course, now he's back to head coaching again. And, but I tell my kids are 13 and 10, and I tell them, go on YouTube and type in these names because I like them better than I like some of the guys right now. But there's a lot of talent in the NBA right now.
You mentioned kid coaching, and we do need to get to talking about playoffs and into seasons and so on. But the kid coaching, I was like, that's a weird fit in Dallas. I guess, he played on that 2011 championship team, and he played on Dallas actually for one stint before all of that. The thing I think I liked about him in Dallas is he was so strong as a basketball player that he's got Luka playing some back to the basket as a guard type stuff that, I think Kid can relate to being, he wasn't 6'7" like Luka is, but can relate to being stronger than most guards and how that interacts with his game. We're going to do playoffs and stuff in a moment, I'm sure, but Luka has kind of taken that step in his game this year. And it's an interesting, like Jason Kidd played that way 15 years when he was really, young and running. Like you couldn't put a normal point guard on him. You had to put more like a Scottie Pippen or whatever on him because he was so big and strong. And I think that's translating into how he's coaching Luka now. It's really cool to watch.
So it sounds like you're a little surprised maybe with the success that Jason Kidd has found so far in Dallas. Obviously, Luka is one of the greats in our game right now. But are you surprised with the amount of success they've had so far?
Yeah, and I think obviously we could all talk about how they struck gold with the Luka pick, because even if you know about like all-time great rookies and all-time great early in the career players, like Luka is a head and shoulders above the most of that kind of conversation, right? Like Luka steps in as a difference maker and bluntly can win you a playoff game right away kind of guy. He's 6'6", 6'7", thick-bodied, point guard with the ball, can give you a 40-piece here, triple-double there, whatever you need. I really thought maybe I was not impressed with Jason Kidd's coaching tenure, his first couple stops. And so I guess I was like, like, I guess there was some talk about Carlisle and Luka not gelling, but like, you want to get the guy that didn't work out in Milwaukee, and like, how is that going to work out? And to be fair, people smarter than me were like, oh, but he was the one that saw Giannis as a point guard. And so he was he deals with big guards. And like, I don't mean to sound like I'm making this up out of thin air. There are certainly people smarter than me that would have seen it coming. I just saw him as having meh runs in previous places. And I was like, Luka's going to want to sign a big contract in a minute. And is he going to want to sign on with a franchise that's kind of got a meh guy running the show? And to be fair, they are, I guess, record wise, they're theoretically not a whole lot better, but they feel more built for a playoff run. they also, they made the big trade with Porzingis at the trade deadline.
Mm-hmm.
And I think raised some eyebrows there. And I think long term, they broke one questionable contract to the best into two, not great, but like contracts you can deal with. And it's easier to move two smaller contracts like that. They're like, than one giant one. And so we'll probably see more roster development in the offseason and before next trade deadline and so on. But on the whole, what that's really done is now it's the Luka show. Like there's no question about, deferring here, finding someone else's spots there. When Spencer Dinwiddie gets in with the second unit or Jalen Brunson gets in the second unit, they get to go too. But when Luka's in the game, it's his show, and it's a really, really cool thing to watch. I do live in Dallas, but I'm not a Mavericks guy, so I feel like I've been sucked up by the buzz for sure. He's a fun watch, though. It's a fun watch.
So it's funny because you're in the area, not a huge Dallas fan. I do a fantasy baseball show with Kevin Wilson. He lives in Texas. He's not a fan of any Texas teams. But you are a fan of Texas teams, just not Dallas.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to have my kids listen to this because they've asked me a million times, Dad, KP for Dinwiddie doesn't make any sense. And I'm like, there's more to it than that. But it's coming from their dad, so they don't care to listen. So we'll see.
You're onto something there, though. You're onto something.
Let's talk before we get into playoffs. Let's talk about the teams that didn't get into playoffs, and mainly so it's the Los Angeles Lakers. Their big three right now is LeBron, who's aging, AD, who can't stay healthy, and Russ, who hasn't been a productive team player in a few years, in my opinion. But I did not expect them to be the 11 seed in the West this year. No matter what was going to happen, I felt like they had enough pieces in place that they were at least going to be in the playoffs. And to not even make a 10-man playoff blows my mind for a team like the Lakers, and for a guy like LeBron, who's been in the playoffs so much over his career, with the exception of only a couple times, and to not be able to make it with the roster that they have this year. I would assume you're surprised, but you follow the NBA closer than I do. Are you surprised the Lakers didn't make it in?
Bluntly, yes. So I would have always assumed they were making it in. And, I think I went back and double checked the tape because I was like, what did I say? I don't want to be contradictory. On my F and Sports podcast and basketball preseason stuff, I assumed they'd make a really deep run and have a shot at winning the whole thing, because they would make roster moves. Because if watching LeBron for 17, 18 years has taught me anything, it's he will make a big roster move if he needs. He will tell the offices, I should say, to make a big roster move if they need to, because he did that in Cleveland. He did that in Miami. He did that the first run in Cleveland. Like, he's just always done that. And then they didn't make that move. And so I don't mean to be like, I was right. Because I was wrong. I thought they'd make that move, and they didn't. But I certainly still would have thought this is one of the 20 best teams in the NBA. LeBron missed some time. That hurt. Davis missed some time. Like, Davis has only played 40 games. That's not quite even half the season. That hurts, right? I also think, and we can get down to nuts and bolts on the Lakers in a second too. The big thing when they won it all in 2020 in the bubble was Anthony Davis shot the 3-point shot at about a 39% and change clip. And he's down to about 34. I know that doesn't sound like a big difference, but when you also then have like Russell Westbrook on the floor, who you don't want to cover out there, and you don't want to clog up the lane with a big, like, I don't know who else they had, Dwight Howard first year. Like, you don't want to clog up the lane, because that's all Russ does at this point is attack the rim. Carmelo Anthony is kind of their sixth man. He's like 37 years old. Like, things start to fall apart all of a sudden, just because like you feel less worried about leaving Davis open from three than you did in the bubble. To be fair to Anthony Davis, research has shown that several guys saw boosts in their shooting percentages in the bubble, whether there was no crowd noise or a clear line of vision or whatever. The bubble, I think, was unique. But that little window has when he's on the floor, even made him less effective. At the end of the day, this all falls to LeBron. And I know you've got LeBron takes to get off, and I'm happy to sit here and hear them. I will, to his credit, say, whether it's seeking a scoring title or whatever, like he had games this year where he still looked phenomenal. I don't think he's cooked. I just think he needs more help than he got. And to be fair, he's 37. like that's the way that goes, you know?
I mean, he's no Udonis Haslem, but Braun. So here's my deal with Braun. First of all, I greatly respect his talent. I in all the knocking I've done of LeBron, it doesn't change the fact he's a great basketball player, one of the greatest to ever play the game. I don't think he's the greatest of all time. I think there are stats that you could pull out that would say, well, clearly he is, but I don't think he is. And I grew up in the Jordan, the apex. I mean, it was Jordan everything. One of my arguments is, I haven't had a chance to spout this off to anybody yet, so here you go. One of my arguments is you cannot be the greatest of all time if you were given a God-given size advantage. So LeBron, Shaq, even Kareem, they have an advantage unfair in the sense that not everybody can control their size. It's not their fault that they're big, obviously. So there is that. And they do things with their size that other guys their size have not done. So again, top 5, I'm all for it. But number 1 overall, I think, is a guy with generally average size in Michael Jordan, who did a lot with his game, perfected his game. And competitive-wise, I don't think there's any question that Jordan is more competitive than LeBron. But both of them phenomenal basketball players and far better than me. I like to put Kobe above LeBron. Some of that's just to egg at the LeBron people. But again, I think Kobe's competitive, his mindset was better than LeBron's. But LeBron knew how to handle what he had, right? I mean, he knew he didn't have to be Jordan in many cases to get to the finals and even sometimes to win the finals because of some of the players he had with him. But Jordan had Pippen, Rodman, others. Kerr and Paxson both played big roles in championships too. So they all had good people around him. My biggest knock on LeBron is his mindset in the sense that he's a bad GM, even though he won championships as a GM. He's a bad GM. He's ruined franchises. He's ruined the Cavs to some degree, but look at them now. Cleveland's in the playoffs.
It took them a minute, but they did bounce back.
Yeah. So that's kind of my knock on LeBron. Again, I think he's a great player. The question I have now is, I think it's a cool idea that he plays with his son. I think that's pretty awesome. But is his son good enough to be in the NBA? And by the time that happens, is LeBron going to be good enough to be in the NBA? Unless he ends up just going down and being a post player, which is kind of not around too much more in the NBA.
So I don't know what the game change should be. So there would be some swallowing of ego if he wanted to go join a good team. I'm assuming we're talking a couple years from now, right? Because Bronny is wrapping up his junior year of high school. He'll be a senior next year. And then theoretically, he'd have to do a year at college or the Ignite or something, unless they really bent the rules to help out LeBron. So we're talking a couple years from now, right?
Yeah.
At 39 going on 40, I'd imagine LeBron is taking a secondary role in whatever team he's on to get a chance to play with Bronny. And frankly, like, kudos to him for trying to do that. I think as of the other day, the rankings might have updated, but it looked like Bronny was ranked in the 43rd or in the top 50 in his high school class. And sometimes those guys do go pro really early. Sometimes they don't. That's kind of like, it's not the clear cut Cade Cunningham was, number 1 overall. It's not, or whatever. Right. And so I'm like you, there'll be some team that drafts him as a G League kind of guy to then become, we can have LeBron on the team. To be fair, like, Utah just did this with Zaire Wade, Dwayne Wade's son. Like, this is not unheard of. It's just unique that he would also be able to play. I want to throw one thing out there, though. When you say LeBron is not a great GM.
Okay.
Outside of drafting LaMelo, like, what has Charlotte done?
That's true. That's true. But the difference is Jordan did it after his playing days versus LeBron doing it in his playing days. So Jordan's ruined 2 franchises in Washington and Charlotte, but he's done it on his expense. Whereas
he financed the whole thing. That's very true.
so LeBron, on the other hand, he says, hey, bring in my guys. Go ahead and pay them, and then I'm going to leave, and then you're going to be stuck with Tristan Thompson and with Kevin Love, and it's going to strap you. And then listen, LeBron had a reason to have a grudge against the Cleveland Cavaliers, their owner. But at the same time, it's like, and again, what he did in Miami wasn't all him at all. That was Dwayne Wade. That was Pat Riley. I think everybody was in on that one. But then the stuff in Cleveland, going back, was it wise to not keep Andrew Wiggins? Sure. I mean, I think they could have been fine with Wiggins too. I think Wiggins would have been a better player had he had LeBron around him. But that being said, and then he goes to Los Angeles. They win in the bubble. Everything worked out smoothly there. But I still think that had they kept the guys that they had in Los Angeles, Julius Randle, Brandon Ingram, that group of guys, I think they could have been really, really solid for a number of years because LeBron does make the team better. But he didn't want to play. I don't know if it was the young guys or he had specific guys he wanted to play with. He made his moves and it set Los Angeles back a little bit. And at this point, they're not in the playoffs. I don't know how badly he wanted Russ. Obviously, he was okay with it. I would assume he wanted it, but there are other guys out there that could have helped the team far better than Russ, including guys that they let go, like Alex Caruso. Honestly, who would have thought Alex Caruso is better than Russ? But at this point, he is
certainly more valuable in a different role. I think the other thing is the big Westbrook move was they elected, it appears, if you're reading between lines on Shams Charania and those guys, that they chose Russ over Buddy Hield, who feels like more complimentary in a weird way. The Anthony Davis trade, I think you bring up, is interesting because Randall and Ingram have both had at least one all-star caliber season since leaving the Lakers. And it's like, I wonder how that would have worked out. The difference, I think, is like you mentioned it, there just aren't LeBron's guys. Like LeBron has his guys, and it's the same way that you had, they had Caldwell Pope on the team for a while because he and LeBron are tight. Like, it's great to have a great friend. I don't know if that's necessarily, you mentioned being a bad GM, if that is the best long-term strategy. I feel like the gift and the curse of getting LeBron James is you will win a title. He's won a title for 3 franchises. Like if you get him on your team, you got a really good chance and will probably win at least one championship. But like you mentioned, when he leaves, the teams have fallen apart. I think the Miami thing would have gone differently had Chris Bosh and had that weird blood clotting issue and been able to play, because then you would have still had Bosh and Wade in a diluted of worked out. It didn't, so it didn't work out, and they bottomed out. Wade actually leaves for a period of like 8 months and then comes back. Like it shook out funny. It certainly feels like the LA thing, who knows if LeBron were to leave this offseason, they'd be awful, right? Like theoretically he'd have to force his way out because he does still have time on his contract. But theoretically they would be very bad next year without him, because he was scoring, I think he averaged over 30 a game this year, right? 30.3 per Basketball Reference, I guess. And they didn't win a lot of games with him getting 30. So I don't know how you'd replace that to be any good next year. They've given away all first-round draft picks basically until like 2027 to form this roster. So I don't know. They, like we said, they can't even draft Bronny. So like I don't know how they get better in the draft. As a Houston Rockets fan, we asked them if they wanted to trade Russell Westbrook back for John Wall because we weren't playing Wall. We might as well not play Westbrook, and they didn't want to do that. I don't know. I don't know what they're going to do.
And the other thing is, too, coaches. I mean, Bron's went through the coaches. With the exception of Spoelstra, you can't survive coaching LeBron. And sounds like Vogel's getting canned here pretty soon. And I don't know. I mean, they're saying Doc Rivers might be interested, but why would you want to go coach, especially at the current state of LeBron? Why would you want to go coach there if you're an experienced coach and you can get offers elsewhere? If you're a first-time coach, by all means. But is it enticing still to go coach LeBron James?
Only reason I could see Doc Rivers. So the leak that came out today was that they're interested in A, moving on from Vogel, and B, in Doc Rivers and Quinn Snyder. And I could see both of those guys heading west if their current situation soured. So like the Philly thing, it feels like they got Daryl Morey, who apparently always wanted Joel Embiid, and they have James Harden, D'Antoni's on the market. Like it feels like, maybe they dump out Doc Rivers up there. So I could see him like, oh, I'll take a job in LA. You know, I don't have a job right now if he were to not be the coach in Philly. In Utah, that experiment also feels like it's kind of reaching the, you know, shit off the pot kind of like what are you going to do about what's happening in Utah? Because they continue to have great regular season teams that get bounced in the first or second round because something schematically doesn't get fixed. Part of that's personnel, part of that's not adjusting, part of that is Donovan Mitchell goes over whatever in a play. Like some of that doesn't work out. And so Quinn Snyder may be on the hot seat and be bounced if they lose in the first round. And it's Quinn Snyder's like, well, it's better than no job. You know, I could see those kinds of things happening. I think it's interesting that no one was like, oh yeah, they're going to go get Budenholzer out of Milwaukee, or they're going to go get Spo out of Miami. Like no coach from those kind of teams. They're not getting Monty Williams out of Phoenix. Like the coaches on good teams are not flocking to LeBron like they might have 10 years ago, right? Because everyone 10 years ago is like, how'd they get this video coordinator guy Spoelstra? Like, how is he luck into that job? And now 10 years later, like, oh, he's a really good coach. Like it worked out, right?
Let's get to Snyder. That's an interesting one because, you know, the large talk is that Mitchell and Gobert don't get along. I would take Mitchell over Gobert, although Gobert has a lot of value with what he does defensively, especially. But I mean, Utah, you just said it. They've had a ton of regular season success. They're a good seed in the playoffs again this year. Well, I guess they're in the top half. You know, are they going to push through, or is it really? I mean, I would take Snyder on most teams to go to be head coach. He seemed to do all right there in Utah, but now things have to change, right? If you can't get past the next step. And we may have lost Parker. He's frozen. We'll give it just a second. He's working. Oh, it might be back. I got you back. Okay. You're muted. Hang on. You're on mute. Let's see here. Still working. Let's see if we can. There we go.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Okay.
The last
all right.
Center in Utah, and then I got the spinning wheel of death, and I was like, uh-oh.
The spinning wheel of death. Welcome to it. Utah, they don't get past here. You mentioned it. You know, something has to change. It's not working, but I would love Quinn Snyder to be the coach of any team that I've ever cheered for. I think he's a good coach. He hasn't had the playoff success, but he seems to be really smart, really sharp, and I would assume he'd get offers elsewhere if it doesn't end well in Utah this year.
Well, and so you mentioned the roster they've got there. Rudy Gobert has won 3 Defensive Player of the Year awards. I mean, some of that has to attribute, like obviously part of that he's 7'2" and defends the rim and he's instinctive, but schematically, Snyder does have him around the rim, regardless, even the space and pace game where they're trying to move centers away from the rim that you see played. And so you have to think that some of that is also Coach Quinn Snyder. He came in right before they got Donovan Mitchell. And so he's kind of, if you're a developing team, I say that like a Rockets fan, right? If you're a developing team, I like Silas, so I don't want to throw him out, but you could see him build your guy the same way he built Donovan Mitchell. I see him getting another job fairly quickly. I don't know what it would be. The LA rumor was interesting to me because it felt like kind of like, that's the guy that's 50 in the West. Like, how are they already talking about that? But you know, I think it's the kind of thing where 50 in the West for the 5th year in a row, like that, or being a first round exit if they were to lose because they're not favored as a 50 in the West, would be kind of disappointing for where they were 5 years ago. And it's not disappointing for them this year. It's just that if you look, you know, they made the playoffs in 2016-17 for the first time since like they had Darren Williams or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. But then they made the playoffs and lost in the second rounds twice in a row, lost in the first round twice in a row, lost in the second round last year. Like at some point that just, it just didn't work. Like you just got to figure out to get farther, you have to deconstruct, reconstruct with new pieces. And then, you know, as a coach, I say, unfortunately, the coach is the first part of that usually, right? I mean, that's just the way that goes.
Yeah, and you know, I go back to the Phoenix days with D'Antoni. I mean, you know, they just tried and tried and tried, and then finally they just broke it all down. And it was like all of a sudden Shaq came in, and it was like, whoa, that doesn't fit the system. It was a sad day in Phoenix. But let's get to the play-in games. You got these teams: Minnesota, New Orleans, San Antonio. All I say young. I guess Minnesota's not as young as they once were. Timberwolves, man, there was expectations for them a couple years ago to kind of start getting it together. Now you got Karl Anthony Towns still playing super well. Of course, he's a Kentucky guy, so a big Cat fan. And then Anthony Edwards comes in and seems to really give them an energy boost, maybe even a mindset boost in Minnesota. And now here they sit in the 7 seed. They're in the play-in games. Out of these 4 play-in teams in the West, which one do you think has the most potential to make some noise in the playoffs?
I like Minnesota because they're young, and I think that obviously younger teams out there. But I like Minnesota as opposed to New Orleans because they're also young. Because you mentioned energy at Anthony Edwards. I think the truth is they just play with high energy on both ends. They force a lot of turnovers. Because they're gambling, like they go for steals and they get beat backdoor when they don't get the steal. But they gamble, turnover, and press the ball in offense. Karl Anthony Towns, for whatever people think of him as a basketball player, is truly unique in that he's a giant that shoots 5 for 6 from the 3-point line in a game, and it's not something you blink at anymore. And in a 1-game sample, they got to play the Clippers. They win, they're in. Like I feel fairly comfortable with that. We should credit Ty Lue for a roster that has 2 max contract guys that have not played much at all this season to be sitting at the 8 seed, which in a pre-play-in season is a playoff team. That is tremendous. You couldn't take the top 2 guys on any other team off and reasonably expect them to be a playoff team. Obviously, Memphis actually has done okay without Ja, but the expectation to make the playoffs, I think, is unreal. And I think I'd pick Minnesota there. Pop and the Spurs feels like an easy pick as far as winning. Can Pop win 2 games in a week to get into playoffs? Maybe it shows my age, and I am 31 and not 21 anymore. But I have a hard time picking against Pop. So I weirdly would pick them to play their way into and play on up. Not that DeJounte Murray is the all-star that Brandon Ingram is or whatever, but I do like their odds there. Pop is Pop, and New Orleans doesn't have that advantage, I guess, as far as the other side of that goes.
Yeah, I mean, DeJounte Murray, he's no Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, but nonetheless.
I knew something was coming on that. I knew something was coming.
He's had a great season. He's in the playoffs, and SGA is not. So be it there. In the West.
I would say not to anything that Shai Gilgeous-Alexander didn't do well this year. It obviously had a very individually successful season. It just Oklahoma City's in a very different spot.
SGA is my go-to on 2K for what it's worth. Phoenix, the best team in the NBA. They've been playing great. They are building off of what they did last year. I love Monty as the coach. I'm a huge Devin Booker guy. Then you got CP3 as well. They're helping out. They've got a solid bench. They're deep and everything with it. Last year, they made it to the finals. And they fell there. Is this a team are they a favorite? I haven't looked at the odds, so I don't know if they're favored to win this year. And what's the outlook for Phoenix?
So only because we did an odd show last week for FN Sports as a deal with my book. Bookie had them as the favorite. I don't know if every sports book would have that. I have a hard time picking against them to win 4 out of 7 in a given series. I mentioned to the guy I had on that day, Thomas Christian's another NBA writer at Belly Up Sports, and we're talking about how I like them because they feel built like my 2018 Rockets were built. They have a rim running center. They have Chris Paul. They have a dynamic scoring 2 guard, and then a bunch of guys that just shoot threes and play defense around them. Like Mikal Bridges, Jay Crowder, all those guys shoot threes and play defense. They know their jobs. And like where Ayton is probably better than Capella would have been, like the 2018 MVP Harden year, whatever you think about Harden, like that was as good as basketball as he's ever played. So, I could see how that goes back and forth. And then to Thomas's credit, the thing he pointed out that I hadn't really thought of is the major difference is that both Booker and Chris Paul do the 2-dribble pull-up in the mid-range as well as anyone in the NBA. And in a league where like everyone is zigging towards not doing that, they're zagging and kind of leaning in. And it's a series, so it's not a one-game sample like a football playoffs, but it's like when you have to turn around and play the Army in football and you're just not ready for the triple option. You know what I mean? Like all of a sudden it's like, how do we figure that out? And it's a little different. When you have to, you feel like you've run Booker off the 3-point line. You feel good about it. And he pulls up from the elbow and you're like, oh, but he shoots that at 60%. Like all of a sudden it's like the math doesn't quite work out anymore. And maybe that's where the game goes, or maybe that's just where two unique players are. But they're really, really fun to watch. They play great defense. I don't know how many people listening to this or watching this like NBA defense, because it's not the 90s where you just wreck people at the rim and that kind of stuff. But the Suns play in the modern sense great defense.
Yeah, and you said it, everybody assumes Booker's this great 3-point shooter. He's not bad, but mid-range he's phenomenal. And I've been listening to all these coaches saying, you got to get rid of the mid-range. Don't let your kids shoot mid-range shots in high school. And I mean, if you're open and you can make it, shoot it. Booker, on the other hand, he gets himself open, takes those shots comfortably, and you expect him to go in every time. And Chris Paul, you talk about aging gracefully. He's had his injury issues throughout the years, even last year's playoffs and finals. But I mean, what he's doing at his age, to me, is so impressive, especially going back to the God-given size. He doesn't have that like LeBron has, but he has done the most with what he has, maybe than any other player in history. And he is considered one of the best point guards ever for a good reason, I think.
He's certainly on a short list of how many other, if you're talking about greatest players, 6'1" and under, right? Because he's about 6 foot 6'1". It my generation would probably bring up Iverson, right? Like there aren't a whole lot of guys that are that type of build, like you're mentioning, that have played with any sort of longevity. This is the sports stove. Right below our faces is a giant grill. It's the best sales pitch for veganism I've ever seen in my life. Beyond Meat has just skyrocketed, right? Because be like Chris Paul.
Yeah, definitely. Elsewhere in the West, we need to get to the East, but elsewhere in the West, Golden State, a lot of people thought they'd have a pretty decent season this year. A lot of guys were in on Golden State this year. They've done well. Of course, Steph Curry's been Steph Curry, which is very helpful there as well. Denver, a lot of people were high on them coming into the season, but they've never been as healthy as they've been in the past, at the very least. So it doesn't seem like people are seeing them as a legit threat. Memphis had a few little injury issues. I'm intrigued by Memphis, and it seems like they're still holding on to the Andre Iguodala not wanting to play with them thing, and kind of using that as their unity binder, and it's working for them. I love what Memphis. If I'm trying to get my kids to love Memphis, because I love what Memphis does, especially when John Morant's healthy and out there as well. I mean, dude, outside of Phoenix, who else in the West scares you as legit threats?
Well, I don't know how much they scare me, but Memphis is not scared. And I think that's important. It's like they've got a bunch of young guys and a coach that hasn't been around that long and didn't play major college or pro basketball. And they're really like, no, we'll beat anyone that lines up. And, I think we saw Phoenix beat them pretty good once or twice throughout the season in a 7-game series. Right now, that series, I guess, would be in the Western Conference Finals. So you've played between 10 and 14 games before then. You mentioned Chris Paul could have the hand injury come back, or a hammy, or knock on wood. I don't want to see it, but if you're playing them later, you're hoping that you see him at least a little tired. So Memphis intrigues me. We mentioned in pre-production, I guess earlier we're talking about Luka Doncic and them too. I think Luka's going to have a star run, and I don't know if it'll be this year. But I could see if Luka can win you a game or two in the playoffs, and then you just got to win 2 out of 4. So do they win those 2 out of 4? I say that and jinx them, and now to lose to Utah or Denver or whatever. But I think he's that kind of a player. The shame you mentioned Denver. You're a Kentucky guy. Jamal Murray not getting to come back at all this year stunk. That Jokic has had and is playing tremendous basketball, incredible individual basketball, and having that sidekick like Jamal Murray, even if they had to play as a 6 seed because it didn't play in the regular season, would be a big boost. And it doesn't really look like he's going to get back, which sucks. Like that, it was a really good year for Jokic, but he's not that kind of a one-man show. Like no one is, not anymore.
Denver's a team that over the last 3-4 years have been so good and just come up just short a couple of times, either bad matchups or injury bug or whatever it was. And I fear that Jokic especially is not gonna get all the long-term attention that he should get, because ultimately I think the team is going to kind of start to go the wrong direction. But maybe Murray comes back next season and is as good as he was and better, and maybe they take another run at it. Let's get to the East. I'm keeping you a long time. I apologize.
Okay.
In the East, play-in game, you got Brooklyn, Cleveland, Atlanta, Charlotte, which is crazy. Charlotte, there's already the talks again about going after Russ Westbrook in the offseason. I just don't get it. But I understand the Jordan connection. But anyways, Atlanta had that big run last year, beating New York. It looked like Trae Young kind of established himself as who he was going to be, and I like that mentality that he showed. They've got a roster. It just doesn't make sense for them to be a 9 seed, in my opinion. They've got too many shooters, too many good things going on that roster, and they made some changes since last year. But out of those 4 play-in teams, Brooklyn's got KD, Kyrie. Ben Simmons is not playing. It doesn't sound like ever, at least this season in Brooklyn. Is KD going to take over, or are they going to struggle here in the play-in games?
I would imagine. So in a 1-game sample, I will say it's scary to think that a bad shooting night for you or a good shooting night for someone else could end your playoffs before they even get started. I would imagine that Durant is okay and they'll be fine. The big thing for them is the uphill climb of, say they beat the Cavs and get the 7 seed on the playing game. They then got to play Milwaukee in round 1. If they win that, they got to play like Boston in round 2. Then they got to play Miami. Like they don't get a round off. And frankly, neither will the team that has to play them. The same way you typically think of a first round, you're easing. Like if you're a team with 2 all-stars, and I'd argue that they're both Hall of Famers, like you would hope that like we can ease our way into this, and they really don't get to. And frankly, out the gate, I mean, they're playing Cleveland, and Cleveland has a couple of all-stars from this season. And while they've fallen off in the second half of the year, there was a really hot stretch for them at the start of the year where they can beat you in a game. I would pick Brooklyn if we're making picks here, I guess. But that's a tough first game. The nice thing about the way the play-in works is the 7-8 plays, and the winner's in. The loser plays the winner of the 9-10 game. And so they're not out on a loss. They'd have to lose twice to be out. Play-in's fun for that, but I think I'd still pick Brooklyn.
And doesn't it stink for Milwaukee? You come through the year, you get the 2 seed, and first round, you're looking at Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving. I mean, you're probably writing the governor right now and saying, hey, we need a new mask mandate. We need a new mandate, immediately put in Milwaukee, and let's get this taken care of. But I mean, that's got to stink. And they're a good team. Milwaukee's a good team, obviously. And I think they can beat Brooklyn. But that being said, that's not an easy matchup after you finish the season as the 2 seed. No,
and both teams look a little different than they did in the playoffs last year. But you got to remember, Brooklyn, if KD wears a size 12, they win that game, right? And Milwaukee won the whole thing, and that's how good Brooklyn was a year ago. So as Brooklyn's getting their sea legs under them, we'll see how it goes. There was some reports today about there's a chance Ben Simmons is back by some point in the playoffs if they play long enough, and it still seems kind of murky as to when that could be. I don't know how integrating a player into your team, even if he's a really good player like Ben Simmons, will work. But they are really hoping that he solves all the defensive issues. Because right now, I'm like yourself, I would pick Milwaukee just because I don't know how they keep Giannis from getting to the rim. And if he does get to the rim, I don't know how they keep him from kicking it out to Connaughton, Middleton, Drew. Like he can hit all those guys for shooters. I I would imagine Milwaukee wins just a really tough first round matchup. And Ben Simmons, I don't know how he'd help, but I hadn't seen it yet.
Right. Toronto had a big step up this year, coming back after not a great year last year. Philadelphia, they're the interesting team, right? Joel Embiid's the scoring champ this year. Of course, LeBron sat out the last couple of games, and then I think Giannis sat out the last game, which ultimately gave it to Embiid. Again, I'm not a Harden fan. I'm not an Embiid fan. But I'm a huge Tyrese Maxey fan. So let's go Tyrese.
Go Blue.
Go Philadelphia. Yeah, Philadelphia, though, they're legit. I mean, they're going to be a threat. They're well coached. They got top-end talent on the team. I still don't think that Harden is a championship player. Not that he doesn't have the talent. He for sure has the talent. But I just haven't seen enough out of him. Can he be the guy that leads a team to the championship? He's been close. Again, I'm not trying to knock his ability. I just don't see it. And I'm kind of that way with Embiid too, although my respect for Embiid is growing by each year. Philadelphia, they'd have to beat out some pretty solid teams too, and of course get through Miami more than likely, get through Milwaukee or Boston more than likely. Can they be a threat this year?
So I like what Philly's doing. I think the interesting thing is when they were really successful, admittedly against some of the weaker teams in the East, but when this trade first happened, it was spamming the pick and roll with Embiid and Harden, and how do you cover it? How do you cover it? How do you cover it? As the years gone on, they've become more of a my turn, your turn isolation. They might start in a pick and roll to get the switch, and then they go my turn, your turn. And I just don't think that's the same recipe for success. I really think that the interesting threat they had was putting, with the ball in Harden's hands, how does Embiid perform as a 3-level roller? Like, so talk about a 3-level scorer, a 3-level roller. He can hit the three, he can hit the mid-range and drive, or he can hit the rim. And that does, frankly, lessen Joel Embiid's impact in a way that I don't think he was appreciating. It appears to be, because he started isolating more. I think the shame here is that this is not James Harden's 32 and putting a lot of wear and tear on his body in the last 6 or 7 years. And 3 years ago, I think this pairing is a whole different pairing. He's just not quite the same guy, and that he's not quite as quick as he used to be. Quickness is one of the first things you see leave. He was never the defender, right? And so it left that in as well. To win. So in the first round, they play Toronto, and Toronto's young and fun, but I would think Philadelphia wins that series. In the second round, they got to turn and play Miami, and play Miami and win against Miami. Maxey has to play well, and Maxey has to play well in a way that outshines Tyler Hero and those guys, because that's kind of the equivalent role, young, high scorer, volume shooter kind of guy. He has to outplay Tyler Hero in a way that Maxey does really well with the ball in his hands. He doesn't move without the ball like shooters do. He shoots the ball okay. And frankly, it's like, is Maxey able to outplay Tyler Hero? You also need Harden to outplay Jimmy Butler and Joel Embiid to outplay Bam, and something with Kyle Lowry. Like, Miami's a tough matchup, and that would be a second round matchup in the East, as chaos as that is. And I don't know if I see them getting past that, which is how we get to Doc Rivers getting fired, right? In some sort of a weird conspiracy theory, maybe that's the setup, is that they fire Doc Rivers because they don't get out of the second round, and then they go get some third star, because that's what the NBA is these days, and rebuild from there. But you got to think, when you have an MVP candidate in Embiid, and you add a former MVP in Harden, you do have higher hopes in the second round, and the East is just so good. I don't know if they get out of it.
Yeah. Let's get to Miami, and then we'll wrap it up. Miami is the 1 seed. Tyler Hero is an absolute stud. Bam Adebayo is an absolute stud. Butler seems to have found his niche in Miami, similar to his early days in Chicago, I would say. But he kind of went through a stage there where he was trying to find the right role, the right team, all that kind of stuff. He seems like he's found it right now in Miami. And I mean, the talent level, again, good deep roster, well coached. They've been there, done that. Not that long ago in the bubble, they were in the championship game when they weren't supposed to be. Now they're supposed to be there. Can they live up to that expectation?
So I have a hard time if I were a gambling man, I would have a hard time putting them past Milwaukee right now. But and this is where matchups come down to play. If they got into a situation where they were not playing Milwaukee, I think they match up with Boston, Philly, Toronto, Chicago, Brooklyn. Like I think they match up with the rest of the teams pretty well. It's when they play Milwaukee and you see a lot of Bam on Giannis. Giannis's whole thing to me has always been, it's not about the guy you have on him. It's about who's got like the wall behind him, right? Like who's at the rim. And if Giannis goes by Bam, they don't have a lot of size back there, right? Like Duncan Robinson is like a 6'8", but not a big. Jimmy Butler plays bigger than he is. Kyle Lowry plays bigger than he is, but they're not very big. I worry about that in a lot of ways. And then if you slide over with Lowry to take a charge, again, we're back to kickouts. We're back to secondary. Like I worry about that happening on that. I just think that's a bad matchup. Whereas if they didn't have to play Milwaukee, if Brooklyn beats Milwaukee in the second round or something that we talked about, then all of a sudden I'm like, oh, I could see Miami getting out of this. That's unfortunate. But we saw a little bit different rosters, right? A year ago, but in the first round, we saw Milwaukee take care of them in 5 games. I don't think I'm crazy for thinking that has that sets some precedent for how things go this year. I like Miami a lot. I mentioned to you a second ago, Bam Adebayo is my most fun watches in the NBA these days. Jimmy Butler, when you talk about competitive drive, that Kobe stuff, like Jimmy Butler's got some of that in him. Not Kobe, but like he's got some of it in him. Kyle Lowry's a chubby point guard. As a chubby guy myself, I kind of like chubby point guards. Just those kinds of things. They're just I don't see him going past Milwaukee. It's a tough matchup.
My dream scenario is Miami and Phoenix. Lots of Big Blue Nation represented there.
Yeah.
But again, not watching much of the regular season. My kids have watched more than I have, so I listen to them a little bit. If you had to say right now, your East versus West winners, who would those be?
I'd have Milwaukee and Phoenix part 2.
Okay.
And frankly, I'd probably pick Milwaukee, although it's way more fun if Phoenix wins because then it's like then next year's part 3. Like it's way more fun if that happens. What I love, so again, if I were a gambling man, I'd pick Milwaukee and Phoenix and probably pick Milwaukee. You've got to appreciate as a small market guy, those are 2 teams that are not on a coast. They're not in a big city, and frankly, have a lot of homegrown talent. Like that's what the NBA needs to be selling is look at the teams that are actually good. Yes,
that's a great point, Parker. 100%. Phoenix too. I mean, they're so fun to watch. Milwaukee's fun to watch. There's a lot of fun teams currently in the NBA. Less, fuddy-duddy teams like the Harden. I know you're a Rockets fan, but the Harden Rocket days just weren't a lot of fun to watch unless you were a Rockets fan when they were winning. But Phoenix is a great place. They've been so close so many times, and to get over the edge for the first time in a long time would be great for them. The heartache of all the Nash era playoff losses. Oh man.
Well, and then the Barkley years and the Marley years, like it just keeps on going with Phoenix.
Yeah. Good teams haven't been able to get over the edge. Maybe they will this year. And honestly, Monty Williams, is there a better coach, more deserving of success than Monty? And not just through his personal adversity, but he's just a solid individual. And those are the kind of guys you like to see get rewarded. Parker, tell everybody about FN Sports and other things that you're involved in, where people can find you and hear you at.
Yeah, so as we started off with, I write for Belly Up Sports. You can find all my stuff there at bellyupsports.com. My Twitter at Painsworth512, PAINSWRTH 512 is where I push all that stuff whenever it comes out. And then I do the show FN Sports. I'm a teacher by day, and so we grade sports topics and theses with hot takes and those kind of things. And it's actually we're coming out 3 days a week these days, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. The Fridays are a little bit more fun, silly fan episodes. And
My dogs say it's time to wrap it up. My kids have been gone for 2 weeks, and they're coming home any second now, and they might be here. I'm not sure.
Well, on that note, I'll let you get to it. But anyway, check out FN Sports. It's a fun show.
It's a great show. FN Sports is a phenomenal show, and catch all of Parker's articles and things as well on bellyup.com. Parker, thanks for being with us today. Everybody else, thanks for watching and tuning in today as well. Until next time, we'll see you